Yeah, hi. So good evening, everybody. So governance and reform is not always the most exciting of topics to a lot of people. Hopefully we can try to make it a little bit interesting for you today, so that you're not sat here listening to me all the time. There will be some other points where you can interact. I've also got both Roger and Richard as well as Debs to call upon if they need to chip in on anything or perhaps to help me answer any questions you might have. If you do have any questions as we go along, feel free to either store them up until the end, or if they're particularly relevant to a topic that I'm talking about, type them into the chat window. Richard will keep an eye on questions. He'll try to work out when's best to chip in and ask them. So if he needs to interrupt me and ask a question, he will do. So first slide. What are the key areas of focus for the Football Supporters Association in this area? So we're going to talk about stewardship of football clubs, and that's quite a wide-ranging area, really. Central to that for us is the need to have a regulator that is independent of football club owners. At the moment, we have the Football Association that has a sort of supposed overarching rule across what's happening in football, but we know that the reality is that its main focus is what happens on the pitch, and certainly in the professional game, it doesn't really get too involved in the governance that's happening there. That tends to be down to both the Football League and the Premier League. And, you know, we've always been concerned. We've talked a long time about why we're concerned about that and how we feel that a new regulator should be there that is independent of those owners so that they cannot continue to make decisions that really impact themselves, and therefore there is a conflict. Within stewardship, there's lots of things within stewardship. We're going to talk about it a little bit more later on, but it's not as simple as the bank account and the finances. It's about how you engage with your fans, whether you engage properly with your community, whether you are environmentally friendly as a club, whether you respect the heritage of the club, all sorts of different areas. Financial controls, few people put finance on the previous slide. Yeah, absolutely central. We could talk for hours and hours, Roger and I, purely on the financial control elements of reform, but that really would put you all to sleep, and we don't have enough time. So we're only going to skirt around some of the real in-depth regulation issues tonight because there's only so much we can do in an hour. But in simple terms, you know, we have to worry about debt, we have to worry about losses, we have to worry about loans, where those loans come from, and we have to worry about charges and mortgages that are put against shares and football clubs and football assets. It's those football assets that we need to protect. Financial fair play, so distribution of wealth, something that's become very topical in recent times, particularly because of the COVID crisis. We've got the government telling football that there's enough money in the game for it to sort itself out, and that the government isn't going to help out. We've got the Premier League providing some finances to the Football League, but in reality not enough. And so this has triggered a whole wider discussion about solidarity payments, parachute payments, distribution of wealth, and alongside all of that and leading on to the next point, competition structure, because we're not just talking about domestic competition. Central to that for us, of course, is always the pyramid and the ability to be promoted throughout the pyramid and to encourage people to go and watch games in the live format, not to sit at home on a settee and watch it on TV, something we're all getting used to doing now, of course, but hopefully that'll change soon. But it's not just domestic, it's also European. There's lots of discussions at the moment about a European Super League. UEFA are due to release their own view on what the Champions League and Europa League should look like for the next few years. UEFA are concerned about the break-off Super League. FIFA are concerned about the break-off European Super League. Let's face it, all of that's about money. There's only one reason that top European clubs want to break off into a European Super League. is to divert more of the wealth to them, which is not healthy for the whole of our game. You know, some of us might sit there and you kind of think when you first hear about these things, oh, do you know what, just let them leave. But actually the knock-on impact across the pyramid is huge. So we do have to worry about things like that. The final point, the movement of players and academy structures. So within that, there's already been a number of sort of changes over the years around academies. There's the EPPP, which restricts the benefit of lower league clubs having academies. The movement of players is always in favour of the Premier League clubs, whether that be because the best ones go there for money or whether it be because they have control of the movement of youth players. But within that, we're starting to see suggestions and moves towards the idea of affiliate clubs, either by somebody directly proposing it or via sort of stealth actions, such as some of those that were put into the Big Picture proposals around control of youth players again. So that's sort of 5 broad areas that we think are very important for the FSA to look at.
Actually, we've got a question actually, which I think is relevant certainly to that first, the stewardship of football clubs and the regulator, from Robbie at Blackpool Trust. He says, if we succeed in getting a formal role for the FSA in regulation, how will you resource it? Will trusts need to step up to help?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We're a member-led organisation. You know, we're very lucky in terms of the global supporter movement in that we are funded to have quite a strong permanent workforce. So we have people that are able to work operationally day to day on these topics, but our members are important. The views from our members are important. And bringing people into certain roles to assist us in discussions and areas of work is also important to us.
I think Roger wanted to come in on that as well.
Just to say that our overriding aim is to get an independent regulator established to take over the running of professional football. And we didn't have it in mind that the FSA would be formally a part of that regulator. And I think it would be important if there is such a regulator that the FSA kind of avoids getting directly involved in the regulatory process, so that the FSA can act as an effective voice for supporters. Because once you've got a regulator in place, it doesn't follow that everything the regulator does will be all fine and dandy. So I don't think we'd want to be too closely involved with the regulator. Our role at this stage is to push for the establishment of the regulator and for a brief to the regulator that meets all the aspirations of fans for the protection of football clubs. Okay,
a couple of slides now, just to skip through really quickly on some of the work that we've been doing in the last couple of years. So the FSA, as most of you know, was formed when Supporters Direct and the Football Supporters Federation merged a couple of years ago. Both organisations have a history of working in reform, and it's something that's very much at the heart of the ongoing work of the FSA. Our major reform paper was released as far back as May 2018. That's something that Roger, who's on the call tonight, was very central in helping us pull together. And that gets into some real detail around the regulation of the game, the regulator itself, and some of the areas of work that we would expect a regulator to pick up. And since that was released, we've had numerous discussions with the football authorities about those proposals. Back in, well, it says 2019 on there. I think it's actually November 2018. We presented to the FA board. We've also had our FA Council representatives talk about our proposals at the council meetings there. Roger and I have had follow-up meetings with FA staff, as well as presenting to the Alliance Committee of the FA. We've also been out to meet the Football League on numerous occasions. We've had meetings with the FA and the Football League together to talk about this in detail. We've presented to the 3 Trident leagues, so that is the Northern Premier, Southern Premier and Isthmian League. There was the EFL's own governance reform and Berry review in 2019, which Roger and I fed evidence into. And then most recently, earlier in the year, we had a four-way meeting with the Premier League, the Football League and the FA to continue to talk about the reform. And you might wonder what's happening in all of those meetings. And to be honest, it's slow progress. But there are areas that we agree on. We are told again at our most recent meeting that certain rule changes that are about to happen or have happened recently do reflect some of the things that we've been asking for. So it's slow but steady. Alongside all that, we work very much with government. And I've just picked a few things that have happened. There was, I think at the beginning of 2020, a 10-minute bill from Chris Matheson about football reform. Yesterday, there was actually a further 10-minute bill from an ex-sports minister, Helen Grant, which was specifically suggesting that the government should legislate to create a regulator. Following input from ourselves, the last Tory manifesto specifically mentioned the fact that they would have a fan-led review. And this fan-led review is something that is very much central to our current plan of how we tackle governance reform. And we do expect that fan-led review to happen in the first half of this year, or at least start in the first half of this year. There's been numerous questions, both in the Commons and in the DCMS Select Committee, particularly in the last year. COVID has really created a level of interest in the House and a number of MPs that wish to tackle how football not just manages through the COVID crisis, but also reforms in the long term. And of course, we work closely with DCMS, who are the government department that look after sport. You may have read about the David Bernstein, the FA chairman, and Gary Neville, amongst others, and their own plans. We've been liaising with them. Many of the items that they support align with ours. I know that they have written a further letter to Oliver Dowden, trying to encourage him to act now. And in fact, the Helen Grant 10-minute bill yesterday was off the back of her work with Bernstein and Neville. So we are aligned with them. We don't agree on absolutely everything around their approach, but many of our points are similar. Actually,
just another quick question as well. Robbie's asking, what does fan-led mean in this context?
So what we believe fan-led to mean is FSA-led. It's us that had the influence into the manifesto. It's us that have discussed with the various relevant parliamentarians and folks in DCMS about how the review would look. We're currently pulling together a number of papers to share around those people to give our input into the structure that we believe the review should take. So our expectation is fan-led very much means the FSA are central to the shape of the review and clearly all discussions within the review. I'm going to move on now to talk a little bit about the detail of some of our proposals, and really, because of the time, it is only a little bit. So I'm going to try and give you an overview of some of the main areas. Going back to the SD days, Supporters Direct created a paper about protection of football assets, and that covered three main areas. What we mean by football assets is things like the stadium, the training grounds. You can all think of a number of football clubs that in the last 30 years or so have been kicked out their stadiums and it's been replaced by a supermarket or something else, and they've never found a new place to play. This is something that happens not just in the Football League, but right the way through the pyramid. And I'll probably ask Richard to comment on this before we leave this slide. So strengthening of assets of community value, two main areas there that I think are a focus to us. One, at the moment, there's no real central register of those ACVs, and that's something that we believe should be created to help keep track of all the ACVs that are out there. The ACV legislation itself, in reality, is pretty weak. What we'd like to see is for it to be strengthened so that a genuine first refusal to buy the asset. And we'd also like to see that the legislation extended to protect those assets from having charges and mortgages placed against them. What we don't want is those assets either disappearing or just leaving football and going to the ownership of people outside of football. Next down, FA and league rules strengthened. So this is specific to those assets, but we believe that there should be more protection around ground moves. So as an example, today, because of changes to the FA rules going back a few years, if a football club wants to change its name, it has to be consulted upon. We as the FSA are always consulted on a name change. It goes to discussion at a committee and it has to be approved. A club just can't do it. That's not the same with moving grounds, actually. You can just decide that you want to go and play somewhere else, and it doesn't have the same level of protections and approvals in place. So we'd want formal consent for both moves and for change of use. We want that to go not just around stadiums, but around other key assets such as training grounds. If you do move, you should have identical or improved occupancy rights. We need to protect the sale proceeds. So on occasions, it might make sense to sell a ground and build a new one or move somebody else. There might be good reason to do it. But if you're selling one ground for £50 million to Tesco's or for housing development, we need to make sure that the majority of that money stays within the club, stays within the game, and doesn't go off into somebody's pockets. And you know, the other thing around this is planning regulations, and this is really one for government to focus on. And it doesn't necessarily have to be legislation. There's plenty of guidance out there to planning regulators and planners in local council offices. And planners can actually today do a lot to protect a football ground, but nobody really points out to them the relevance of protecting the ground and what they could do. And I always refer to an example of my own club, Portsmouth, where a planner did have the foresight to protect Fratton Park as in the city plan. And as a result, when Pompey were going through its very difficult period of administration, and numerous people swept down to try and buy up Fratton Park and knock it down and build a supermarket or a hotel or some such thing, they all were basically rebuffed by the council because the use of the ground was protected in the city plan. It had to be used for football, and that put a lot of prospective developers off. So there's work that government can do about planning as well. I just wanted to ask Richard, because I know Richard's working on a couple of live cases in non-league specifically. You know, I mentioned that this happens throughout the pyramid. And I think it's important, Richard, to perhaps give us a couple of examples of what's happening in non-league now where this is real.
Definitely, yeah. As far as the first box is concerned, the ACVs, we've had one just in the past week, actually, which is many of you will have seen, I think, a bit written about Basingstoke Town and their move from the Camrose, their historic ground. They've been playing away at Winchester City. They've now identified another ground back in the centre of Basingstoke. But just last week, they actually managed to get an ACV on the Camrose. So that was good news. As Ashley quite rightly says, it's quite limited. I think I've just seen Neil's comment in the chat box as well. The ACV is still quite limited in that only gives you the certain rights and not really sufficient to really. I think that's something that could undoubtedly be strengthened as well. As far as the FA and league rules strengthened, as well as Ashley pointed out, with the to do with the names and ground moves. We've pretty much seen a ground move under the radar in the past couple of weeks in National League South at Truro City, where Truro Road, the traditional ground that Truro have played at, has been sold to a supermarket by the owners, which is the Cornish Pirates, the rugby club, and they're moving to a ground when things start up again over the border in Devon. So it's just two little examples of the sorts of things where things really could be strengthened for our clubs. We talk very, very regularly. In fact, I was talking to somebody I can see on the call today, just this afternoon, about planning regulations and planning applications and all of those good things. And that's something that we do very, very regularly with people. But again, also areas that do need strengthening. We do need to protect those assets, most definitely.
And I wanted to talk about the basis of some of the major reform principles that came off the back of the paper I mentioned we released in 2018, because it's still very, very relevant. We've talked about the creation of a regulator. That regulator, we don't want it to be too heavy-handed. I think that's important. We want, first off, the regulator to help prevent problems, to go in and help. There's some other national associations around UEFA that do this very well. The idea is to help people out and prevent the problems. And clearly, we also don't want to make an administrative nightmare for all those clubs that are run well. And there are plenty of clubs that are run efficiently, run sustainably. We need to focus the effort on the clubs that we believe are at risk, and it's those that are going to be subject to sort of a higher level of audit. Along with the prevention, there's always going to be people that break rules, and as such, we need to bring in effective and also progressive sanctions. There are plenty of sanctions available today between the Football Association and the leagues. They're very confusing. They don't always line up with each other. They're not necessarily transparent as to what the sanction might be for a particular punishment. That's an area that we need to improve upon. And that level of accountability and transparency throughout the whole process is important. As football fans, we have little or no idea what's going on as far as governance of our clubs is concerned. We don't know if our clubs are under embargo. And if we have heard a rumour of why they might be under embargo, we don't necessarily know why they were put under embargo. That transparency is hugely important for us. The famous owners and directors test, it has been improved over time, but it's still far from perfect. And certainly the Football League owners and directors test is rather simplistic. It doesn't really go into a huge amount of detail. One of our proposals is that we actually should separate out the test for owners and directors, because they can be quite different beasts. The responsibility of an owner of a football club, albeit has some similarities to being a director, they're actually quite different. So we'd separate those out into two separate tests. We want the owners and directors test to really bring to light the ownership structure and also the operation of shadow directors. Lower down the pyramid, it tends to be fairly obvious who your football club owners are, but the higher up you go these days, it's become incredibly clouded. The Premier League and some Football League clubs are owned by a series of offshore umbrella companies based in tax havens. Clubs are owned by hedge funds. Gone are the days where you could just nip onto Companies House website and figure out who the 5 people are that have a 20% share in your football club. Surely we should understand those structures. And we also need to bring under control those shadow directors, the people that the real influencers of the way a football club is run, who may not appear on Companies House as a director or shareholder. We want owners to produce a multi-layered business plan, not just when they take over a club, but on an ongoing basis. And what we mean by multi-layered, we're talking about not just the financials. The financials are hugely important, the business plan of how the club is going to run sustainably is important. But so are things like, how are you going to work with your community? How are you going to engage with your football fans? How are you going to adhere to the owner's code of conduct that we propose should be in place? All of these things should also be submitted as part of a business plan. Have the directors got relevant skills and experience? Do they understand football? This doesn't have to be over onerous, but you could run some very simplistic education sessions just to help people understand the role of a football director in this country, because let's be honest, not everybody does. How the acquisition is funded. This is becoming perhaps topical again, even as high as the Premier League, because press reports suggest that the recent takeover of Burnley is in the form of a leveraged buyout, very, very similar to the one we've seen at Man United with the Glazers. Perhaps not to the same extent in hundreds of millions, but certainly in tens of millions. That's something I thought that we were going to stamp out in this country, but it appears it's still happening. We need to control what funds are allowed to be used if somebody wants to take over a football club. So regulation reform, stewardship and heritage. So the annual reporting, this is a continuation from the business plan, and it has to demonstrate that effective stewardship of a club. So as well as saying, yeah, I'm going to break even, I'm not selling off all the assets and extracting the money, it's also going to say about how you're really caring for that club. Because we all believe that owners are stewards of the football clubs. You know, they come and go, classic expression, but they come and go. It's us fans that are there all the time. We don't go away. How you fund your club on an ongoing basis. There needs to be more control about what debt is allowable. What types of loans are allowable? You know, we see loans to football clubs with ridiculous percentages. You know, I've seen them as high as a 28% interest loan from some shady offshore outfit, payable within a year, with the club having absolutely zero hope of paying it back. Also, it's fairly common, and sometimes it's a good thing, but we see owners loaning money to football clubs. Sometimes that's great, but you know, if they're lending money and they're charging 15% interest, it's a nice little income for them off the back of their football club. So it's not always done in an altruistic fashion. And we also need to keep an eye on the charges. You know, should you be allowed to borrow a load of money against your stadium so that you can buy a centre forward? We don't believe you should be able to. There are occasions when you might want to secure a loan against something such as a stadium. For example, if you want an infrastructure project that's going to improve the stadium and improve the financial viability of the club in the long term, that might make sense. But that level of control is not currently there. We believe it should be. In Germany, they do something called the net asset test. So every year, as part of their submission to be licensed as a club, they have to prove that their net assets are as good as they were the year before. This is effectively to control the extraction of money. So we know that clubs, they might break even one year, they might make a small profit the next, they might make a loss the following. So this isn't around the P&L, this is around understanding the balance sheet and making sure that all those core assets and value of the club stay there on a year-to-year basis. And then again, we touched on protection of assets. Stadiums and their locality is important. We've seen, you know, with Coventry repeatedly in recent years, they've been forced to play at Northampton. They're currently having to play at Birmingham, and yet they've got a perfectly good stadium slap bang in the middle of Coventry. But because of a dispute, an unnecessary dispute that's caused by the owners, they're currently playing in Birmingham.
I'm going to be splitting you up into breakout rooms just to discuss the question which is on the screen. So what happened to Bury and Wigan?
We did want to have a little bit of feedback from that breakout session. And I know that both of those examples are pretty complex ones. But I do want to pick on a couple of volunteers just to try and generate some discussion. So firstly, I want somebody to stand up and talk about what they think happened or is happening at Wigan. Literally 30 seconds. You don't have to give us a big detailed think piece on what happened. And then I'm going to ask someone to do the same for Bury. So if we've got a volunteer for Wigan, put your hand up or say something in the chat.
Yeah, wave at us. If anybody wants to do Wigan, give me a wave.
Neil's volunteered to do Bury.
Neil's volunteered. Anybody for Wigan? Going once. Hey, Ian Bridge. Excellent. 30 seconds. Ready? Can he go now, Ashley? Can he go?
Yep.
Go on then, Ian.
Who's going? Oh, me, right? Okay. Wigan bought in the past from Dave Whelan for 40 million, we believe, by Far Eastern money. Then sold on for some unknown reason during lockdown, and then put into administration in the beginning of July. How they're still in administration when they have had bidders in place, goodness only knows. In our discussion, we got around to talking about the performance of the administrator, and there is certainly seems to be experience and a reputation there with the actual administrator appointed. All that money is going to go out of football, money that goes to the administrator, and there was a deal that had broken down Christmas time, and now it seems to be on the open market once more. So they're no near a new owner, it would appear. So it's quite a sorry tale. So I don't know what's going to happen with Wigan.
So I think that's a good 30-second summary, Ian. I think you picked up on one of the main points I was going to talk about, which is the administrator. It's another area of major frustration for us. You know, the administrator fees that are racking up at Wigan are huge. I think they've done a pretty poor job. They've invested huge amount of man hours into, so far, 2 deals that always look like collapsing. I've been working closely with Wigan Supporters Club that are doing a good job up there, and was involved in discussions, certainly in detailed discussions with the second consortium, and it always looked set to fail. The administrator pursued it for weeks and weeks and weeks, eating up time for the club and also racking up their own invoice. Wigan now have got, in my mind, two big deadlines, 2 big dates in the future that anybody trying to save the club have got to have in mind. The first one is if Wigan comes out of administration and doesn't obey the Football League criteria, as it may be subject to further points penalties. If you do that before the 3rd Thursday in March, you can take those point penalties now. And basically, you're going to be in League 2, which probably Wigan got a good chance of being anyway without the points penalties. Go past that date, if Wigan get relegated off their own back, then that 15 points is put forward to next year, so you start League 2 on -15. That's a big date for them. The other big date is there's a Football League rule that says you can't start 2 seasons in administration. So if they don't come out of administration prior to the start of next season, they get kicked out of the league. So that's a pretty big date as well. So continues to be worrying times for Wigan. Did Neil not volunteer for Bury, but Richard did? I saw some things in the chat.
I think Neil had put some things in the chat, a bit more of a description. So one of those two.
Did Richard say he was willing to do it?
Yes, I can do it if you like.
Yes, please.
Know a little bit about this. I spoke with Bury supporters some time ago. Oh, Neil saying he's going to do it. Well, let me say what I know, perhaps give Neil 15 seconds. A single owner problem, had their eyes on the asset of the ground, resulted in a Phoenix club. And I did encourage them. Life wasn't at the end for them, because the strength of any club is the supporters. So it's a single owner, and there's no transparency as to what on earth they do. That was the main problem.
Right, thanks, Richard. I could talk for an hour on Bury. I'm going to try and talk very quickly on a couple of other areas. The Bury problem built up over a huge period of time, not just with Steve Dale, but the previous owners that overspent and moved monies around various companies all of which started to fall apart, and the club suffered from that. Steve Dale, quite frankly, just a parasite from Bury, trying to squeeze the last embers of anything out of the club. He's played the game. He's tried to delay administration and the survival of the club. Gig Lane, which of course is central to the continuation of a Bury Football Club in one form, is mortgaged to a company called Capital Bridge. Capital Bridge itself went into administration, and really the ultimate charge holder is another company who is effectively a global pension fund or investment company. So there's all sorts of other complexities around Bury. Steve Dale continues to try and keep hold of what he can to get some sort of financial exit for himself. He's already moved all the heritage assets to somebody that nobody knows where except for him. He's stripped all the offices and we believe sold all that on. Certainly the administrator has said in his report that he doesn't know where any of the heritage items are or where any of the furniture and internal items have gone. And he's clear that the club was not paid for those. So Bury, complete mess, but we do have the Phoenix Club, and some Bury fans have done an amazing job there with AFC Bury, and hopefully they can grow and flourish. Bit of a speedy response. I'd like to have had more chat with people on that, but as I said, I am overrunning, so I'm going to skip on to talk about.
Ashley, if I could just say,
yep, Neil.
If you look at our summary, we focus on what needs to be done coming out of what happened at Bury, rather than just on what happened, which is, I think, the important lessons to be learned.
Absolutely, thank you, Neil. Yeah, and in a way, what happened at Bury, what happened at Wigan, the COVID virus, and also the information that sneaked into the press around Project Big Picture last year has had a number of impacts on the whole governance and reform debate. The focus on the need for reform in football has increased, and not just internally, but externally as well. So with government, with parliament, with the media, newspapers that traditionally you never thought would be writing back page stories about the need for reform, the need for regulation, now are. It's a much bigger focus than it has been before. Even within the hierarchy of football, some publicly, some perhaps behind closed doors and in discussions with ourselves, have hinted that they are in agreement with the fact that major reform and the need for independent regulation is required. When we put together the paper in 2018, we actually left out quite a number of items because we thought football wasn't ready to discuss them. So albeit quite comprehensive, the paper is not wide enough to cover the holistic discussion that needs to happen now. There is real movement and momentum building behind the need for a regulator. I mentioned before yet another 10-minute bill in the House yesterday, and that one wasn't even triggered by us. Normally we have something to do with it. That one wasn't. Big picture was huge. Big picture scared the Premier League. All of a sudden they realised that a handful of their clubs were off having discussions behind their back and trying to effectively route more of the money to themselves. The same that's happening with the European Super League. We know clubs are talking about the European Super League. They'll deny it to the hill. They'll even deny it to the Premier League, but everybody knows it's happening. And, that raises the question of whether a breakaway is inevitable. I don't think it necessarily is, but we do have to address it full on and secure the pyramid for the longer term. And then finally, of course, COVID has really brought home the financial aspects. We all know that football was in a financial mess before COVID started, but this has just inflamed the situation, understandably so. Clubs have now had coming on for a year with limited or no revenue from supporters at games. That's central, certainly outside the Premier League. That's absolutely central to a club's survival. And I'm amazed, to be honest, that we haven't seen an administration yet, but I still think they are coming. Sustain the game. We decided last year that we needed to create something that would be an ongoing campaign around governance, and also something that was easily digestible for everybody. So we came up with these 5 core areas. If you don't know what Sustain the Game is, and you haven't got time to read that now, it's all on the FSA website. Do go and have a look. But we think that those are 5 key points that most football fans would agree with. So the last one, and I know it's something that a lot of our members keep asking and probably get a bit frustrated with us, because in reality, there's little that can be done at the moment. We do come to fans and members every now and again for help. Our focus very much is still on the fan-led review from government. We do believe it will happen. We are told by significant people within government that it will, and that it will be acted upon. And so we're very much focused on preparing for that at the moment. We don't believe that the football authorities will make the big jumps voluntarily. They are progressing piecemeal, but to make the real big jumps that we want to see, they're going to need either a big push from government or legislation. And that's why we're very much focused on the fan-led review.
One of the opponents, as it were, of a lot of things that we're trying to do here are the big clubs and perhaps the fans of the big clubs. And I don't see them in attendance here. And I'm wondering to what extent we need to get them on board with what we're trying to do, which might be against their interests as they see it, in that they could be in a eternal paradise of European and worldwide football.
So, Roger, as far as our members groups are concerned of those big clubs, they're all very much aligned to the FSA views. And in fact, when Project Big Picture was announced last year, or leaked, should I say, we very quickly had a joint statement from the key supporter groups of each of the big 6 opposing the position of their clubs, and effectively calling for reform and supporting Sustain the Game. And they will also, because we've already had discussions, be willing to do something similar when it comes to questions around the European Super League. So, albeit they might not be present today, I think they are active and on board, even if their clubs are trying to take themselves off in a different direction.
Yeah, it's the great mass of their supporters that I also worry about. You know, the millions that they claim are out there that never go to their stadium but watch on telly and so on.
Well, it's those are the ones that that will not necessarily agree with what we're saying and be happy to go off into European football. But clubs are aware, and again, this is a thing that COVID has done. It's made everybody really realise how important it is to have fans in stadiums.
Just one a bit parochial. All the mentions of discussions with different football bodies, the FA, EFL, the National League never got mentioned, and I'm assuming that they don't really want to take part. There's no dialogue, and to an offer really. If anybody can do anything to try and Chester would like to be able to help with that. We do have some dialogue with a lot of clubs, so it's just noticeable to me. There's massive problems in the National League. There's no financial fair play. There's no salary cap. It's basically the Wild West. And having dealt with the owners, some of them, I don't think support was really coming to their considerations too much. So yeah, just a couple of points there, really, Ashley.
So, Michael, firstly, apologies, because we intended to speak more about non-league today, and I was supposed to refer to Richard and bring him in. But as we looked at the time, I got more and more rushed and forgot to do it. We have spoken to the National League, and Richard and our colleague Andy are in constant dialogue with both the FA and the National League about governance issues specific at that level. Albeit clearly some of our wider reform proposals are impacted throughout the pyramid. Richard, I don't know if you're around, and want to jump in and comment further?
Yeah, just on the National League, they have a new general manager now, Mark Ives, who we have established contact with. We are beginning dialogue with him. Obviously, a huge amount of issues around grants against loans and all those sorts of things, which basically has a major impact on the continuation of the season within steps 1 and 2. And also we have very regular contact with all of the chairs of the Trident leagues, which keeps us very much abreast of what's going on. And of course, one of the things that we do constantly is talk to our member clubs as well. So particularly the community-owned clubs such as yourselves, Michael. That's where we glean a lot of our information from too. So keep it coming in that respect. But we try to get regular advice out, particularly on the community-owned club network. We and non-league in general. We've put a lot of advice out to our members, and we'll continue to do that and keep you abreast of what's going on in our discussions with the league administrators too.
I think as well, just to jump in here on the women's game, just because of the timing issue, we were meant to be talking a little bit more about National League and the women's game and how this kind of is applicable, and what work we're doing in both those areas. So sorry if you feel like you were missed out. We definitely know there's reps on this call, and we fully want you to know that we are working on it behind the scenes. So just apologies if anybody felt left out.
Thanks very much. It was only just a quick one just to remind ourselves on the transparency issue. We're looking not just for the transparency of clubs, but also of the operation of leagues. Talking National League, they apportion some monies from a grant from the National Lottery, but they don't want to tell their member clubs how they apportion the money. So it's quite an interesting situation, and I think the regulation of the leagues is also an important thing to try and get some movement on. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll let Richard comment specifically on this issue because I know we've been involved in that discussion.
Yeah, that's symptomatic of a wider problem as well. And I think 2 or 3 points that I could make on what Ashley's said here is that the problems in non-league actually get exacerbated because the clubs are more vulnerable to take over. And as a result, actually, the staffing of the leagues is in no way as robust as it would be much further up the pyramid. So, whilst we have some excellent, I would never decry the work that the vast majority of people do within the leagues themselves. But of course, there's only a limit to the amount of work that they can do. Your point that David Bernstein put in his letter to the National League, etc., asking for wider transparency. That issue has not been addressed. The allocation of the monies, probably the transparency has been really poor from the National League, and that I think a number of us probably know the reasons why that is. But it has to be better, and we're hopeful that sort of a new general manager there may elicit at least a bit more information on that. But you're absolutely right, Richard. It's been a pretty poor show all round.
The dubious administrations that go on, like looking at what happened at Wigan, at Portsmouth, we had a dubious administrator, and luckily Trevor Birch came in further down the line, his company, and they did I think they were a bit wary of a buyout from the trust at first, but it literally made the difference between having a club and not having a club. And now with his role at the EFL, I don't, Ashley and yourselves would, make that quite an important issue as well. It seems to be underlooked, the role of these administrators who rush in and see the money signs themselves.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. It's a good point. And we at Portsmouth, we've seen it from both sides. And I've already had a discussion with Trevor about the administrators at Wigan and given him my view. So clearly we're quite lucky. Portsmouth, we worked very closely with Trevor for a long period of time, so I know him quite well. So we do now have some good links at the top of the Football League and somebody that is interested in these topics. So hopefully that will help us.
Come to your network manager if you need any other support or you'd like to ask any other questions. We've got some awesome training videos on our YouTube channel and some explainer videos that might help you explain things to your members. So it's just a good access point to sort of share information that we might be putting out. Following us on Twitter and Facebook and our website as well. You know, we try and do, is it monthly articles at the minute on Sustain the Game, Ashley, or is it, how are we doing that?
No, it's just that various things that crop up that relate to it, they'll go under the Sustain the Game banner.
So just keep an eye on our website, and just thanks very much for coming on to the webinar. We've done this so that we could try to use a different and creative way to explain some of the things that we're doing, and hopefully we've managed to illustrate and help people understand a little bit more about what the FSA is doing in this area of work.